Men, do you ever feel like you just can't get ahead? Like you're misunderstood? Like you have no one to talk to that truly hears you?
And women, are you often frustrated, hurt, and saddened in your relationships with the men in your life?
What if there were a community of like-minded men going through the same challenges that would support, hear, and understand what you're going through?
Working together in unison to create understanding, intimacy, and strong connections. That's the Way of the Illuminated Warrior.
Way of the Illuminated Warrior Talk Show is a forum of candid conversations for men and women about men. Being a man today is not always easy. Until now.
All right. Well, I am stoked for another adventure of the Way of the Illuminated Warrior Talk Show because I have some brothers here. If you guys were on the show, checking out the show last time, Patrick Paul Garlinger has been just started to co-host with me, and we have Harry Liddell here today, who you may have caught in a previous adventure. So this is going to be really good. So I want to just dive right into a topic that I know the three of us doing men's work and work with different clientele is really vital and important. And I'm sure you guys will agree that's the finding the balance of healthy aspects in our life, like a healthy balance, particularly our emotional well-being. And of course, there's countless ways that we could find healing in this topic. And I know one aspect that's really prevalent, I know in the men's work I do, and I know Harry and I have spoke about this, and Patrick and I have pondered this around, is when you're facilitating men, anger comes up a lot, and expressing that healthy anger, I know is a topic that's very passionate to you, Harry. So I want to just start there, and then we'll kick it around. So healthy anger, expressing it in a way that helps us to heal. And take it away, Harry.
Absolutely. Thank you for the intro. Healthy anger is, one of the most repressed emotions that I think our culture has, because we associate anger with aggression, with violence, with causing of harm. And so people either don't have control over it and it comes out as rage, or people repress it completely and say that they're not angry even slightly. And those are the two poles of the warrior archetype, which is the sadist and the masochist. And for a lot of men that I see, especially in the work that I specifically do, there's a lot of nice guys. And this is kind of one of the roots of it. It's this repression of our own anger, which has more implications than I think people realize. It's not just anger, it's also your own ability to stand up for yourself. It's your ability to say what you mean what you say. It's your ability to take up space, get your needs met. So when you repress anger, you kind of are repressing all of these other aspects that are required to be a healthy human who functions. And because a lot of men are repressing that, they end up in this nice guy persona, which is more about masking and manipulation, and something that, was a lot of my teenagehood and into early 20s. And so I help people, get in contact with their healthy anger, which is this nice central balance of the warrior archetype, where you actually just speak your truth and you're unafraid of doing so. And you have no shame over your own experience of anger. And for a lot of men, you have to dig really deep until you get to healthy anger. You have to find all of the parts of you that say that I'm not an angry person, or say that anger isn't safe, and uncover it. And then when you do, you suddenly care way less and you're not so bothered about being a nice guy. And that helps men to really step into their power.
Great point. Patrick, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you, Harry, when I hear the phrase healthy anger, I'm immediately taken to certain mindfulness teachings around anger as an emotion. And on the one hand, all emotions being sort of valid expressions, that we should feel them, right? We should allow ourselves the full gamut of human expression. But there's a sort of another side. On the other hand, the sort of no version of anger is actually healthy as expressed or acted upon. And so I wanted you to sort of perhaps elaborate on, do you think that there's ever an outward expression of anger that is actually healthy, or is sort of you getting in touch with your anger, just a portal to sort of a deeper understanding of sort of where you're feeling disempowered and these other things. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a big distinction that I make is like, does your anger come from a disempowered place or an empowered place? Because coming from a sense of disempowerment, it's more likely to fall into the rage category, where it's that there's been some research by this psychotherapist called Dr. Alan Kalpin, who says that people who are experiencing rage, it's not from a biological perspective really anger. It's more akin to an anxiety attack. It's a panic attack more than anything else, in an outward violent expression, which is like a learned behavior. And, if you're coming from a place of anxiety and stress, that's not really an empowering place to be. And so that's not the anger that I teach people. I teach people to come into contact with their empowering anger, which is that I'm full and whole as I am, and I deserve to stand up for myself in this moment. And so it's not so much an outward expression as much as it is like a standing tall and saying like, I matter. And because I matter, I'm going to very clearly state what matters to me and how I really believe that this should go, and that I deserve to be treated well. And so that can come with it like an experience of empowerment. And that's what healthy anger really is. It's a sense of empowerment. It's actually a relaxation in the body and a mobilization to attack. That's how Dr. Alan Kalpin says it. But that kind of looks like, your jaw goes forward, you lean into a space, you have this sort of healthy aggression to you where you're unafraid to like be in that space and to say what matters. And the disempowered rage aspect is where all of the bad press comes from for anger, but it's not really anger at all. And so that's one of the things that really helps people to separate from this, media created experience of what anger is, which is not even slightly.
I think that's a great distinction, because rage and anger are definitely two different things. I grew up being very, very quiet, being very introverted, and just stuffing that anger down. And we know how unhealthy that is. Yes. And then I remember a particular incident when I finally found my voice and was asking for healthy boundaries. And it's like, well, he's angry, like it was this horrible, horrible thing. That I was expressing anger, and and for a moment, maybe more than a moment, it flashed me back to being like unworthy and being a bad, little boy, and all those feelings and emotions came up for me. But doing more research on it and doing my own self-help work, it really became evident that there is a such thing as healthy anger. Because for a while, I'm like, no anger is good, but I don't see that as being viable anymore. I think to keep it in and keep it stuffed down is very unhealthy. So the healthy anger aspect is and getting it out in a good way and not being violent, not being rageful, obviously is really important as well. So for either of you guys, Harry, if you want to start, and then Patrick, maybe you could speak to this also. When working with clients, particularly maybe in men, when they have that, rage / anger that's coming out in a posturing way, in a way that can potentially even lead to violent behavior, how do you work with somebody like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so there is something to be said for rage. Like, I think a lot of people do have repressed rage, and it is kind of like an anxiety attack and like a blend with this aggressive, violent behavior. And to a certain extent, I think you do have to process that sometimes. If people have had like very extreme boundary violations in their past, you can't just bypass the rage if it's there. So that is something that I, with the clients I work with, I say, if you do have that within you, don't repress it, allow it to flow. So I say, like, set a 20-minute timer, have a safe container where within this 20 minutes, you are just your fully enraged self, and that's okay. Punch pillows, scream, whatever is required. And then once the 20-minute timer goes off, you're out of that space. You exit the space so that you're not carrying that with you for the rest of your day. But after a certain period of time, there is a lot of catharsis that comes with rage, but it actually doesn't really heal trauma a lot of the time. This is, I can't remember who, I think it's Dr. Peter Levine. He talks about this, about healthy anger, healthy aggression, and says that, experiences of rage don't really change much. They might feel good, but it doesn't really transform trauma. So the healthy anger that I teach is actually a very gentle process, which is about coming into contact with your solar plexus, which is your power center, where a lot of anger gets stored. And that, like, relates to Chinese medicine and all this kind of stuff. And you start to titrate it. You start to, like, move the hands, like the shoulders and the jaw is where a lot of anger gets stored in tension. And you're trying to just slowly build that sense of what is in fact power. You're trying to reconnect to your empowered self. It's not some, like, the use of the word anger can sometimes be confusing. It's actually much more accurate to say you're getting in contact with your power and embracing that, letting that flow, breathing it up from your solar plexus into the rest of your system. Because if you think about it like repressed anger is being localized and stored in your solar plexus area, then that means that's all of that repressed power that isn't in your system. And so we're trying to titrate it from your solar plexus area into the rest of your system so that it's a nervous system state change rather than something that's been stuck there in your solar plexus. And for me, this is like the reason I'm so intertwined with this work and why I want to help bring it to the world is because I got super ill and all of my chronic illness was actually related to an immense amount of tension in my solar plexus. I had like chronic fatigue, I had chronic digestive issues, chronic histamine issues. I was like a total mess. And it turns out it was all repressed anger and power in my solar plexus. And so titrating it out has been the greatest healer for me.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I would echo a lot of what you just said, Harry, particularly around the idea that this is sort of, it's really about empowerment. And that's why my original question about sort of healthy anger was, for me, that process of sort of reclaiming a sense of I'm worthy, I'm here, I'm drawing boundaries, whatever it is where you feel like the boundaries have been, your boundaries have been breached, you're not being seen or recognized, that sense of losing power or repressing power, as it comes out, there's anger behind it because it's sort of attempting to recover the sense of power that was lost. And, there's something when people, at least I'll speak from my own experience, and I think this is true of others, there is something that is enlivening about anger. It's expansive. Like you suddenly do feel more powerful when it comes out, but often it can be unskillful. Even if it's not tipping into rage, it can be unskillful. There's an edge to it. And, the process that you described is one where there's a point where you can say, I matter, I'm drawing a boundary. You're mistreating me. Your behavior right now is one that I'm now going to sort of draw a line with. And it doesn't have that sort of push of force of like, I now need to marshal this sort of anger to sort of tell you to back off. That's what I see a lot in the people that I work with. And my clientele is actually typically more women, not always, but for the most part, I would say that the majority of people who come visit me are women. And that is a place where there is a lot of bypassing of anger. And because of the people that I typically work with have a kind of spiritual identity around it, anger is seen as sort of anathema to the sort of mindful, contemplative, balanced person who is, feeling, oneness with the world. Anger is considered very low and very destructive. And so there's a really deep unwillingness there as well to acknowledge anger when there is this process that you described. You described as titration, this process of kind of coming to terms with the places where we have not exercised expression, not drawn boundaries, not expressed our needs for whatever reason. And that ultimately does become really a sort of, it gets locked away, but then when it's released healthily and skillfully, it's really quite relieving in the way that you described.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you're making there. And there is a distinction, of course. Again, growing up, it was not okay to be angry at all. So that's totally changed. And, for me, the goal is not to get angry. I think that's probably a realistic goal for most people. But it happens to most, if not all of us. So having the tools to be able to do that. And I love what you said, Harry, about as far as the different tools to scream into a pillow, beat up pillows, whatever you got. Pillows are cheap enough. We could deal with destroying a few pillows, but having those tools to actually be able to diffuse that anger, because we all have anger, and just like Patrick was saying, women maybe bypass a little bit more, but either way, putting that energy into our bodies and not letting it release, just like you were saying in the beginning, Harry, it will manifest and it will show up in unhealthy ways. I think we all know that, the energetics of it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dr. John Sarno. So you know him. I don't know if you know him, Patrick, or not.
Yeah.
So just real briefly, another friend had turned me on to him, a photographer in the business. He had chronic back pain for years. I was young at the time, in my 30s and early 40s. I remember when he actually first turned me on to this. Basically, the long and short of it is, this Dr. John Sarno did experimentation with his practice for a few thousand different people, and determined that if you were in a car accident or something like actually physical that damaged your spine or your back, yes, you will have potential structural damage. But when there was nothing notable there, it's basically repressed emotions, and it's amazing. For me, I am not kidding you, like this, when I read this guy's book, I was going through a lot of family stuff, and just I didn't even realize how much emotional trauma that I was suppressing into my back, because that's where we carry a lot of it, and our shoulders also. So my whole spine was out of whack. And literally just doing the practices, breathing intentionally, bringing oxygen where it was deprived into these areas, and acknowledging, hey, structurally, there is nothing wrong with me. And releasing, you didn't even have to know where this specific anger was coming from, but a really amazing work that this guy has done. So if you guys are listening, or anybody that could really benefit from, it's not just back pain, just releasing emotional pain and trauma through doing this work, check out Dr. John Sarno. So so that came up for me when you were both talking about that. So so what other tools?
I love that.
Yeah, awesome. What other tools do you recommend, Harry? Because there's a wide berth of anger that I'm sure, especially doing the men's work. I know I've seen it. I mean, I've literally had my life threatened at times, just working with brothers who are just who are much bigger than me, who are just who've gotten really angry, and I'm like, feel it, breathe it, bring it out here, and so you have to have those tools. So I'm wondering, what else do you offer to the men, rather than, it's easy when you're in a controlled environment, say, here, hit this pillow, but when the rage and the anger is really coming out, it's not so easy to say, okay, well, here are the healthy boundaries and here are the tools. So what kind of experiences could you share on that vein?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't speak to, doing that in-person anger work yet. That's going to be something that appears, but at the moment I've helped people online in a coaching context. And so, there's never been any threat specifically to me. And in some ways that might be beneficial to that person, because there's nowhere for their rage to go. And so they have to sit with it, and there's no way to project it outwards. But yeah, I mean, it's just energy. It's just pure energy, and it is in an outward expression, and it needs to come out. And there's a way of just, doing it bit by bit and not trying to overwhelm. I think that's something that can definitely happen, is if, go too far too soon, that rage can appear explosively. And sometimes it might anyway. But it's, just a very gentle titration approach where, even if I'm working with somebody and they're experiencing some kind of anger, some kind of rage, it's just the movement of the hands, just slowly letting that feeling build to a place where it doesn't feel overwhelming, and then letting it come down again, and then going a bit deeper, building up that experience again, letting it go down again, because it's just from a trauma lens, going into overwhelm is actually not beneficial And it's a difficult thing because sometimes it just happens and not much you can do about it. But for the most part, as much as possible, it's like the slow titration is the most powerful way. But yeah, I mean, I can't speak to having done it in person yet, but I'm interested to see what happens, and I would love to know what your tools are for dealing with that, because I do not know any.
Well, if I will, and then I want to hear from Patrick also. The first thing that comes to mind, and this is something that Patrick and I recently had talked about, which I will say you cannot underestimate the power of going into nature. And even guys who have not had this experience before. So this one gentleman in particular, I mean, literally, the dude used to be with the mafia. So I knew this going in. We had a friendly relationship, but he was going through some pretty heavy duty stuff. And he literally said, I feel like killing somebody right now. And he wasn't, I mean, he was saying this literally because he's, I'm not going to out the guy, but that's the world he came from, and I was a little scared, but I grounded myself, and we were in a meditation room in my place at the time. This is years ago. I said, let's just go out on the land, and I took him, into the woods that were close by my house, and we just sat there. We grounded. I said, lay down, man, feel your body. I mean, these are some practice we had done before, because the work that I do is always based around getting back into nature and being surrounded by the elements and all. And it did just diffuse him. I'm like, just let Mother Earth take it. Let the heart, the womb, the luminous roots just touch your body and just give it to her. She could handle it. And that really, I would say, probably more than almost anything else. If that's the only tool I could draw upon, I go to it every time, because it literally is the mother of us all, the sustainer of us all. She could hold and bear. I mean, look at what we do. I'm not going to get into this topic, but look what we do to Mother Earth, and look how she is so resilient. She does not need us. She could spit us off at any moment, and she will renew and revive. And so that would be my greatest tool that I bring to the guys. Just get into nature and be grounded and get back to Mother Earth.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love that.
We'll be right back after this. Do you sometimes feel down, lost, or lonely? Are your finances feeling sluggish? Can your relationships use a healthy tune-up? Don't fear, bro. Help is here. Experience the benefits of connecting with other men who are going through similar challenges. Be supported in our safe, sacred, and inspiring monthly telecircle with the Brotherhood of the Illuminated Warriors. Connect with Waska for one-on-one mentoring, with the first session completely free. What have you got to lose? Check out IlluminatedWarrior.com or send an email to Waska@IlluminatedWarrior.com. You're invited to step up your game and join us. You'll be glad you did.
So, I love that we're talking about anger, because for me personally, this has been the emotion that I've struggled with the most in my life. I am somebody that used to have a very complicated relationship to my emotions, as many men do. But as a gay man, I actually had a certain sort of greater excessive access to certain emotions. I mean, I could feel sad, and I could feel lonely, and I could feel that sort of despondent, depressed sort of range of emotions much more easily. But anger always scared me, and largely because I was always aware of a certain amount of anger in me already, from moments of disempowerment in my life, but I've never wanted to ever cause anybody harm. I mean, that's one of sort of the deeper things of sort of like losing it and causing harm, even in speech. So it tends to for me, the big practice is learning to sort of connect expression to that anger, the throat chakra to the solar plexus, so that I can draw boundaries, and I can share how I'm feeling, and I can say I'm here and I matter in a way that isn't unskillful and causing other people harm. And so that's the part that I really try to work with the most, and that's not easy, but I try to come up with ways to sort of say, recognize where I can feel the anger building, because I don't want to speak whatever truth needs to come out at that moment, for fear of offending somebody, causing them harm, causing some sort of reaction back that I have to then deal with, but learning to speak and feel that anger sort of very quickly turn into power, because I find that when people suddenly, who are really not used to saying, this is what I need, this is my boundary, no, the moment you actually voice those words, it's like that hurdle is a tremendous shift. I mean, I've in countless places where I've like, oh no, I really need to say this. And I've sort of mustered up the courage. I've needed to get it out. And you do it. And then you're like, oh, okay, the world didn't fall apart. They didn't attack me in response. So for me, that's the practices of really learning to sort of say, this is what I'm feeling, or this is what I need to express about myself in this moment without worrying about the reproach.
Yeah. I don't know how you respond to that, Harry. I think that's a really great point. And we're not really taught these tools growing up, right? I mean, I know I wasn't. Most of the guys that I work with weren't. And the paradigms that we're taught, like we're supposed to be strong, we're supposed to be builders and fixers, and we're not supposed to emote, So how do you navigate through that without stuffing it down and getting ill, really? I mean, and that's why I think that's a large part of the trauma that goes on. A lot of guys, I mean, some of my best friends, have asked me for counsel. They won't come into the inner circle forum because they're fearful, just like you were alluding to there, Patrick, which is kind of sad to me. Like, how well do you really know your best bros? If you think about it, like I have certain friends, like to a degree, I feel a little more comfortable with you guys on that level because I could share whatever I want to share. And to me, if you can't share your truest, deepest, your shadow self, your fears, your emotions with your brothers, that are going to support you, then, where is that really true camaraderie and friendship? And I'm not dissing anybody, because I understand where that comes from. That's part of the work that we have to do. But what a beautiful thing when we do sit in sacred circle, and it doesn't even have to be in sacred circle, but when we stand for and with each other, and we have each other's backs, and I could say anything to you guys, and I know you're not going to judge me. I know you're going to be like, okay, how do I help my bro out here? What a beautiful thing, right?
100%. Yeah, beautiful. And it's a testament to your capacity to hold yourself and then to hold others. And yeah, I mean, to speak to what you were talking about, Patrick, with regards to, these parts of you that don't want to cause harm, like a big part of the shadow work with regards to this is that there are parts of us that want to cause harm. And it's actually getting in contact with those parts and saying that they're okay, but they are potentially wanting to cause harm in an unhealthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we allow them to speak what they need to say, but in a healthy way, and whilst at the same time honoring that part of us that wants to cause harm? And so a lot of the clients I work with, I recommend, take up a fighting practice. Get to, Jordan Peterson, I don't particularly like him, but what he talks about, which is where, a weak man isn't virtuous for being nice. Like a dangerous man who can hold in that danger is more virtuous than the man who isn't dangerous at all. And there is like a lot of truth to that in terms of the shadow integration size. That actually, have you integrated the dangerous part of you? Because every human has the capacity to kill another human. And a lot of people want to deny that. And a big part of getting in contact with the warrior archetype is understanding that actually, no, I am capable of this. And I am dangerous if I want to be. And if I don't accept that, then I'm actually potentially, I don't have control over my own dangerous aspects. So what I tell my clients is that the repression of the warrior archetype is a spiritual wound, because we used to be hunters, we used to be warriors. That was just an ingratiated part of our psychology, and it wasn't separate. And to get in contact with that again through some kind of like combat sport, some kind of aspect of the fact that life involves death, and being okay with that and not putting it into the shadows is so important for really helping your nervous system feel safe and grounded in no matter what situation you are, and knowing that you are powerful, and that it's okay to actually, to a certain degree, to hurt others, as long as it's you speaking your truth. That is okay to be, quote unquote, the bad person. And that comes with the territory of being grounded in your truth and being a powerful person, is that you're going to piss people off. You're going to hurt people sometimes. And that's okay. And can you align your nervous system to being okay with that?
Yeah. I love what you just said, because one of the hardest things I think is for people to do that work of really looking at the capacity to do harm and integrating it, as you say, and not letting it sort of basically be out of control or capable of controlling you because you haven't been willing to look at that. And for me, that did show up in this sort of sense of like, I really don't want my words to harm you. And so being very measured, being very careful, and that's a little bit different from being skillful. I mean, I was sort of, holding it back, and I had a couple different experiences that really sort of brought that to the surface. And one of them, a situation, an experience that Waska and I've talked about on an ayahuasca retreat, where one of the very first messages I got was, stop requiring, permission from other people for you to be yourself. And so one of the mechanisms that I had learned as a kid, and it was where my sort of sensitivity to emotions and my intuition really kind of became very skillful and refined, was using my ability to sort of sense where people were to make sure I was safe, and to then gain permission and feel like I always had permission for what I was about to say. And that was a huge thing of not realizing that that's basically what I had been using my intuition for all these years, is sort of monitoring people's, emotional states, and then being like, okay, I'm safe here. And now I can speak, as opposed to saying something. And yeah, as you said, potentially hurting people, hurting whatever, they feel an impact, they feel implicated, which is their stuff. If I'm not doing this intentionally to hurt somebody, but speaking my truth, like, this is me, and that's their reaction, I don't have ownership of that, I'm not responsible for that. That was something that I had to work through for many years. And that's part of what I was getting at earlier about that voicing of my truth, and not having it come from a place of anger, because I had measured and waited for permission for so long.
I think that's a really great point and a great distinction also. For me, just to speak to what you're both saying, and especially to speaking our truth. So in the program, that I was offering on Long Island, it's evolved. I'm not going to get into that now, but part of it was opening up our throat chakra, our Vishuddha, and speaking our truth. And one of the young guys just really took it as he could say whatever he wanted, and it got a little out of hand. And part of our protocol was, hey, no holds barred. If you want to curse, curse. If you want to scream, scream. If you want to cry, cry. Whatever the emotion is, we're not here to judge each other. We're not here to fix each other. We're here to support each other. So I felt it was important, though, and I still do, to add the caveat: when you speak your truth, speak it with compassion, which may sound like, yeah, of course, sure, but that's not what always happens, especially when you're in that anger mode. And I think we can still express that healthy anger with having compassion, also drawing boundaries, and also letting go of the control. Because I hear when you were speaking about that, Patrick, what triggered for me was like, yes, I want to be in control of what people think about me, what people say about me. I don't want to reveal too much about me. And that was big for me also, just letting go of that control aspect, so I could be a lot more open and accessible, not just for myself, but those around me. So I don't know what your experience is around that, if anybody wants to share on that topic.
Well, just to respond, for me, it was definitely worrying that my words were going to, offend or hurt or make somebody else feel bad about themselves primarily. And so, I've always been very concerned about sort of inclusivity of language and making sure I don't feel somebody's excluded and things like that. But there's certainly a part of my psyche that was bound up in being a young gay man and, expressing that truth, and then the sort of sense of exclusion or exile. And, to sort of go back to, a topic that I think we've alluded to is just, growing up as a young kid, well before I even understood what was going on with me sexually. I felt very at odds with, as a teenager with kids at school. I wasn't particularly good at sports and things like that. So, I had a real sense of sort of not belonging and not fitting in with other men. And so the anger there was sort of, trying to sort of prevent more exclusion, more being isolated, being considered a nerd or whatever it was that my younger self thought of.
I wanted to ask you, Harry, about you mentioned before, and the three of us have done shadow work, like the importance of actually looking at that shadow side of ourselves and integrating that into like the holisticness of our well-being, and specifically addressing like healthy anger.
Yeah, 100%. Beautiful. So for one, I mean, anger is a big component of what I do as shadow work / shadow integration, because anger is in the shadow for a lot of people. Like, healthy anger is in the shadow for most people, because most people will trend towards either rage or towards absolutely nothing at all. So that's what I teach people, is like how to bring it out of the shadow. How do you actually come to a place where you can truly claim the fact that you are a whole human who has the full range of emotions, and you have access to all of these different possibilities for yourself? Because, as we spoke to you before about the ability to cause harm, that is a possibility that exists. And if you don't claim that as a part of the potentiality that exists within you, then you're actually more likely to cause people harm, because you'll do it in like sideways fashion, where you just like manipulate people slowly over time, or you just don't speak your truth and you hurt people like over the long stretch, rather than just like, okay, I'm going to speak my truth, you're going to be hurt for a little while, but then you're done. That's like the embodied healthy anger, where you can just say it. But most people are falling into the shadow version, where it's like, actually, I'm just going to manipulate you until everything bursts into flames. And at least for a really long period of time, I get to feel like I was a good person. But at the very end, actually, now I was actually a terrible person. So it's that claiming, like a lot of what I say is like the ability to claim the ass-holy version of you, because they exist. They're totally there. Either you're aware of them, or they're no, not I. Absolutely not. Just a purely good person. And then this is something my mentor, Rainier Wild, said to me when I was working with him. He was like, You're just such a good guy, Harry. Saint Harry, such a wonderful man. He was taking the piss, obviously. I wasn't. But that's the image that I projected. And this comes into the identity version of it. It's like, okay, so what is my identity? Who is Harry Liddell? Who is this client? And within that identity, what are they and what are they not? And the identity obviously is purely fictional. It's made up. It's a conversation that exists in our heads. And so can you go beyond your identity and realize that actually, okay, beyond my own perception of myself, my own conversation about who I am and the experiences I've had in the past that reinforce that, can I see what actually exists before me as a possibility, as an expansion of my identity, to eventually, if you go super spiritual, the dissolution of it entirely? So that's a big part of it, is like all of these parts are in the shadow, they're outside of your quote unquote identity. Can you expand your identity to include them to the point where your nervous system understands that, and you can release all of the old emotions that, so, from an IFS, internal family systems perspective, if you have repressed emotions, your body doesn't understand that they're from the past, it thinks they're in the present. And so your protection mechanisms will be responding constantly to your own old emotions. And so unless you release them, you'll still continue to react to them. And a lot of people are in like a constant state of fight and flight, because their own identity of who they are is inherently unsafe. And so if your own identity is that of someone who is unsafe, you can be sitting alone in a room and be triggered, and that makes no sense, obviously. And so it's that, okay, who are you? Like, who are you? Who are you, and why is you unsafe as you are, even in a totally circumstantially safe environment? And can we find out what is in the shadow that is triggering that, what is causing that, reclaim those parts of your identity, expand, and find a place where you are actually intimate and in relationship with reality, which is, for the most part, for most people, pretty damn safe.
Good point. Like, I want to ask you, Patrick, because you kind of alluded to it also. For me, the shadow work, just generally speaking, are the aspects of me that I don't want to look at. It's the things that are not illuminated, that are the dark side, and are not necessarily negative or what we perceive as bad things. But I think growing up, that's the mindset that we take on. So, Patrick, you were talking about like growing up as a gay man and your perception and thinking about your feeling about how people thought about you. So what would you say, like growing up, even not even knowing it was your shadow side, like how has that evolved for you to be able to be an author now, be able to be outspoken for yourself and for other people and to work with clients? Like, what was that aha moment and that transitional space for you?
Well, for me, shadow work, it's always been recognizing that there are these moments of triggers, of these places where like you could feel the emotion sort of come up, and it would be tied to a thought, but the emotion seemed sort of almost unmoored from this situation. So for me, there were certain moments in my life where I would just notice having reactions that seemed utterly unreal. And this ties back to Harry's point of this is sort of buried in the body. Like our bodies are essentially sort of repositories of this unresolved emotion that would come up. And this is going to be a very strange example because it's not really tied to anger. But for me, as a kid, I had the most horrific fear of going through the library and leaving the library, because and this sounds bizarre, but you know how the libraries would have those sort of like little metal detectors, those little things that would beep if you didn't like swipe the books and demagnetize them?
You were stealing books, weren't you?
See, that's just it. I was terrified of being stopped and being accused of having books stolen. And so there was this emotion in me that somehow would be tied to doing something wrong and being caught, right? And then I was able to sort of, over time, there are vestiges of that if you believe in sort of past lives or in generational trauma or stuff that passes through the cells and is just carried on as cellular memory, whatever your kind of framework for that is. There's some part of that came with me. But I did have an experience as a child where my mother told me I couldn't cross a certain street, and it was to go to a mall. And I was like, defied her. And I was walking with my friends, and I had to be like, 7 or 8. I was pretty young. And she was right to say, don't cross this side. It was like a huge highway to get to this mall. But literally, as I'm about to step off the street to cross, like, our destination is in sight, I feel this searing pain as my mother grabs me by my earlobe and like drags me back ashamed.
Wow.
In front of all my friends, right? Like, so here's like, a moment in time that like, I didn't know how to process that. Nobody taught me how to process it. But of being utterly humiliated and ashamed for having transgressed the law at that moment and done something wrong. And so that, all of that got then filtered in and carried through and then sort of would show up in other situations. And over time, I just, recognized this kind of process of like these emotions trapped in the body, connected either to a prior memory or prior moment that just get repeated and repeated until, as Harry says, you do the work of like really, really looking at this, accepting it, and making sure that they feel okay. Like these parts of us need permission and then skillful integration.
That's a great point. Yeah, these parts do need, all parts of us need love. And I mean, I think that's a really big part of it. So thanks for sharing that, Patrick. So how about you, Harry? Like, what was your aha moment? Particularly if you could remember something when you were in that transition from being a boy coming into manhood. What do you remember?
For me, what comes up, I had like two specific experiences in my childhood, which is like I had an asthma attack when I was maybe 7 years old. My parents divorced when I was 8. And for whatever reason, my psychology connected the two in some way. And my shadow for a long time came out as health anxiety. And it was just like, I could never be healthy enough because, and I was, I would try and be as healthy as I could be. And I was, and then I eventually was trying so hard that I became ill. Ironically, universe works in mysterious ways, had a lesson to teach me. But it was all based around shame. I was ashamed of being weak. And so I had connected being weak with being abandoned in some way, shape, or form. And that was my shadow. And it wasn't like one of the big things for me to realize is that no one specifically taught me that. I had created that. And this is a large part of the empowerment process is it's realizing actually, wait, no, I kind of chose this. I wasn't conscious of it and it's not my fault, but somewhere in some point in time, I created this narrative. It was me who did it. And that means I can also stop it at the same time. So yeah, for a lot of people, it's just this, where in what ways am I ashamed of myself? And shame is really the bedrock of all of this. Shadow is essentially shame to a certain degree. It's like, I am not this because if I was, then I would be a bad person. It's all this shame narrative. I'm a failure, I am wrong, bad. But in the dissolution of those narratives is like profound sense of freedom and joy and vitality and all of the parts of ourselves that have been previously repressed. And we usually exist within this pretty narrow numbness bar of like, don't be too expressed, don't be too depressed, and just stay in this nice little narrow bar of numbness. And a big part of the work I'm doing is trying to expand this bar of like helping people to be more expressed in the positive and in the negative of whatever that might be. And yeah, so that was my experience. Is just like I associated weakness with abandonment, and then that manifests as health anxiety. And so I'm very, very familiar with how the shadow can play out for me now.
Yeah, I could share my story also because I flashed back when you were saying that, Harry. So, I've shared this before. I was very introverted and quiet and shy, and even in my family. So it's just me and my sister. She's 2 years older. And my mom used to like cheer me on. She always wanted me to hit my sister back, but I never would. And I was probably, I don't know, 6, 7, no more than that. And in that place of just, and I don't even know how it happens. Maybe it's just the family of origin, it's peer pressure, it's family teaching, it's the society going to, temple schools, whatever. I just felt very small. I felt very unworthy. And I was literally paralyzed. If anybody wanted to beat me up, which I was bullied, I could not move. And that included my sister. And even with my mom, my mom was like, hit her back. And I could never do it until one day. And this is so interesting because I'm having this feeling and this healing right now. I never realized it was the anger within me that just wanted to come out, that I picked up a hockey stick and like I didn't hit her with it, but I went to hit her, and the good little Perry Finkelstein like stopped, because I was like, oh my God, I might hurt my sister. But she cringed and like started crying, and my mother came in and was like, what happened? He hit me, and my mom was like, yay, So that was like an epiphany moment for me, like not that okay, I could use anger, violence, whatever, but it was like, wow. There are these trapped emotions in me that need to get out, that it's not okay to just, keep shriveling up and enduring this. So I think we've all shared like pretty pivotal moments that we didn't know any better. We weren't taught any better, and that's why the work that we're all doing, I think, is really so vital, because we have these experiences, we can empathize, and we could share tools that we know work with other brothers or sisters. And that's really the key, like not being shameful about these things, because there's nothing to be shameful about. So yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys, for sharing those, those intimate moments. And we're coming close to the end. So before we do end, I just want to go around the circle, so to speak. And we could start with you, Harry. If you had a really brief opportunity with a brother that's going through a hard time, and it's manifesting in anger, not an esoteric teaching, but hey, bro, I'm hurting, man. I'm angry. Help me, man. We got a short period of time. How are you going to help the brother?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess it just very much depends. If someone is experiencing that, I would essentially begin with saying, okay, let's express what is here. Let's express what is here. Let's get to a place where, you've emptied the cup a little bit, and then go in a bit deeper and say, okay, what is your identity that is creating this experience of anger? Because it's, your own body that's generating it, or it's from the past, either way. So for a lot, a part of, what I call is anger work, is one of the principles is that grief is cooling. This big fire we have of anger, and then one of the ways to actually cool it down is grief, is to cry and to let that fire be put out. And so a lot of people, their identity is what is happening because I'm bad, or life is not the way it should be, and it should be different because there's something about me that's wrong, and so life is unfair, or whatever it might be. And so to really figure out what is the identity that they hold, and then figure out if we can get to a place where they can really grieve that identity and really get their experience and go to that place that they've been holding for a long time. Because a lot of men have a big well of grief, which over time, because that grief has never been tended to, it just accumulates as anger. And they're angrier and angrier because life isn't fair, because really, a long, long time ago, they never got the opportunity to grieve. And so that's really the root of it all, is giving them the opportunity to grieve, and so the fires can be put out. So yeah, that is what I would say.
Beautiful. Thank you. What do you want to add to that, Patrick?
I want to add / ask Harry a question, because one of the things that is interesting about our discussion is that we're talking about men and anger. And somebody might say, well, it seems like the emotion that men are most able to access and most readily access is anger. That's, angry men isn't exactly particularly novel. I mean, in fact, most of the men that I've known in my life, anger was primarily the only emotion that they could display. So what's the deal about, men having difficulty accessing anger? It seems like you guys have a pretty easy time with that. And, you guys have, one could step back and make an argument about, sort of men's power in society. Where's your powerlessness? So I think it would be really useful, as we come towards the end here, to talk a little bit about, how that is a stereotype around men. Why, and you were alluding to this, of men having a deep well of grief that comes out as anger. In other words, that sort of men sort of being angry is itself a really deep symptom of something. And so I was curious to get your take on that. I have my own take, which I can share, but I wanted to hear your, and you too, Waska, the sort of, men seem pretty easily able to access anger. So what's really going on here?
Yeah, I think it's, back to that distinction between healthy anger and not healthy anger, I guess, right? And yeah, as we spoke about, it's I think because a lot of men are essentially taught to turn off their ability to grieve, they can never really let go of things. Grieving is a process of letting go. Mm-hmm. And so they just accumulate all of this grief, and then culturally they're only allowed to express one way, and they have a very deep sense of unfairness as a result of having all of this accumulated grief, which they're not really conscious of. And yeah, it erupts as life is unfair. Life should be different than the way it is. Mm-hmm. And so that associates to anger, which is kind of like a defiance. And that's men, because men of their physical stature, because of they are just stronger. They have that ability to go into this more physicality, this more aggressive experience of removing emotion, of expressing emotion, and that kind of looks like anger. And it's like, okay, I'm going to project out my pain rather than take responsibility for it. Whereas women will usually send their anger inwards, and it will look like shame, and it will look like illness. And women have the higher incidence rates of autoimmunity and all these kind of things. And I would say it's related very strongly to that. So a lot of it does kind of just have to do with culturally what is allowed, also physicality, like how strong is somebody. If they take up more space, they can get away with it. And it's very unconscious process, and there's no blaming or shaming with that, but that kind of is the reality of it. So yeah, that is what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Just because we're coming to the top of the hour, I would just conclude by saying it's okay. It's all okay. I mean, this is the way we're raised. So if you are in touch with your feelings and you're looking to do something about it, yay, beautiful. I mean, if you're not, well, obviously then, as my mentor Ocean Fastwell would say, you're still asleep, and that's okay too. But the fact that you're open to it, and you whether it's grieving or however you're going to express it, beating up pillows, it's a step in the right direction. Shameless plug, if you want to reach out to any of the three of us, we have the tools to help you. Reach out to somebody. I'm a big proponent on men's circles. Doesn't have to be my circle or Harry's circle or connecting with Patrick, but we're accessible to you guys that are listening. But reach out to somebody, because keeping it in, we know, is unhealthy. So I just want to end with that and just give you guys the opportunity for anything left unsaid. Patrick, anything left unsaid you'd like to share with the audience?
I don't know that it's left unsaid, and but it just, to follow up on what Harry said, and it just feels like what happens for men is that you're sort of put in a double bind of having all of these range of human emotions, positive and negative, that you're not allowed to experience. And you're told in some way or another to be a man is to not experience, it's to, you have to not show these things. And so for a lot of men, one of the difficulties is that you're confronting this kind of double mind of like, I want to feel different, but at the bottom of it, if I am admitting I'm ashamed, if I'm admitting if I'm grieving, in some ways it's to sort of suggest that you're also still not a man. And there's a real identity issue there that gets in the way.
Well, we could certainly ponder this topic and share a lot more. That goes without saying. Harry, anything left you want to speak to?
Yeah, I mean, just off the back of what Patrick says, it was just, if I feel like even a slight urge to cry, just cry. Like, I cry almost daily, and it feels amazing. And I talked to some men who were like, "Oh, I can't cry. Like, it feels awful." It's like, well, it depends what the meaning is. Like, for me, the meaning is release, and it feels amazing. And the same is, like, I'm trying to really install that into my nervous system with regards to anger as well. It's like, can I really get to the point where expression just feels amazing, because it's like I'm alive and I'm feeling this power course through my body, and I have the capacity to use it in a healthy way, and that's beautiful. And it's all grist for the mill and more empowerment, and therefore more joy, vitality, and benefit for those I love and all my friends and everything. So I would just say that, just express in a healthy way as much as you can, cry as much as you can. It's a beautiful thing. It's all release.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. And the big takeaway for me is just that: do something, grieve, cry, laugh, meditate, whatever it is that you have to do to get that anger out in a healthy way. So I want to thank my co-host Patrick, as usual.
You,
Harry, from across the pond. If we didn't mention before, he's coming to us for 5 hours ahead. We really should have been talking about what happens 5 hours in the future, but we'll get to that another time. So, so thank you, brother, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to be here.
All righty. So if you listeners and viewers are enjoying what we're putting out there, please connect with any one of us. Our information will be in the show notes, and subscribe, all that groovy stuff. So until next time, continue to illuminate your paths with love and kindness.
Visit IlluminatedWarrior.com if you'd like to go deeper and find out more about what's available within the Illuminated Warrior Men's Transformational Community. Tune in next time for more candid conversations for men and women about men on the Way of the Illuminated Warrior Talk Show. Until next time, illuminate your path with loving kindness.